Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling the blind spot, oligarchy and wealth defense. And you know what? We're actually going to skip our usual intro today because I want to pull you straight into a fascinating historical mystery, one that fundamentally changes how we view power and money in our society. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture Miami, 1973. It's literally like the setup for a classic spy thriller. A vice president from a bank in the Bahamas flies into town for a date. The woman he's meeting picks him up, but they make a quick pit stop at her apartment, where he leaves his briefcase. Now, what he doesn't know is that his date is actually a private investigator, and the mutual friend who set them up? Yeah, he's an informant for the IRS's intelligence unit. So the whole thing plays out perfectly for the government. While the couple is out at dinner, the informant sneaks in, photographs every single document in that briefcase, and slips it back exactly as he found it. The VP flies home completely clueless. But the files the IRS captured? Absolute goldmine. They were expecting to find, I don't know, mobsters or something, but instead they found a list of some of the richest, most prominent citizens in America hiding massive amounts of money offshore. The IRS realized they had entirely missed the top 0.1%. But here is the crazy twist. When the IRS got a new director, a guy who used to be an elite tax lawyer himself, he personally stepped in and shut the entire investigation down. He decided going after the ultra-rich just wasn't a proper use of resources, and he refocused the unit on quote-unquote typical crime. The government at the very highest levels made a conscious decision to just turn a blind eye to elite tax evasion. To really grasp this scale of what was ignored, look at this number. In 1973, the year of that Miami briefcase heist, the richest 0.1% of Americans held 9% of the country's wealth. Today, that number has essentially doubled. To put that into perspective, a group of people who could comfortably fit on a single double-decker bus now holds as much wealth as half the entire U.S. population. It really makes us ask a critical question. Why is this dynamic so incredibly hard to change no matter who we vote into office? Section 1. Redefining modern oligarchy. To figure out why this is so tough to fix, we first need to completely let go of our preconceived notions about what an oligarch actually is. Like, what exactly comes to mind when you hear the word oligarchy? If you're like most people, you're probably picturing foreign billionaires controlling oil fields, or maybe some shadowy group of 10 men officially running a government. But I want you to reconsider that association. Here is a crucial point, captured perfectly by political scientist Jeffrey Winters. Oligarchy isn't necessarily about ruling a country directly. In the modern era, extreme wealth is itself a form of power, and oligarchs happily give up the hassle of running the state day-to-day or being armed warlords in exchange for one thing: using their immense power for wealth defense. They rely on the state to protect their property, sure, but they use their wealth to defend against the state's attempts to tax or redistribute it. Section 2, the wealth defense industry. Let's peel back the next layer of the onion and look at the mundane, quiet machinery that executes this strategy every single day. Now, you might be picturing some nefarious cabal plotting in a smoke-filled room. But actually, this army is just a loose global network of millions of incredibly smart, everyday professionals. Honestly, if you search for a stock photo of a financial worker, you are looking at the wealth defense industry. We're talking brilliant graduates recruited to essentially do one job: protect rich people's money from being taxed by the government. And how do they actually pull this off? Well, the mechanics are straightforward in theory, but incredibly complex in reality. The government can only tax an asset if it knows who owns it, right? So the wealth defense industry creates mazes of offshore shell companies, bouncing from the Cayman Islands to Hong Kong to Delaware, all to muddy the link between the asset and the owner. Shell companies are the core ingredient here. They make it practically impossible for the state to trace and tax the wealth. The impact of all this invisible machinery? It is absolutely staggering. $100 billion. That is the approximate amount of tax revenue the United States government alone misses out on every single year strictly because of these wealth defense strategies. Globally, governments lose out on about $500 billion annually. And hey, this isn't just abstract government math. This hits your wallet directly. Studies have shown that the average honest taxpayer ends up paying at least 15% more in taxes just to make up for the revenue that the ultra-rich successfully hide. And since that figure was calculated decades ago, it's almost certainly even higher today. Basically, we're footing the bill. Section 3. How wealth shapes policy. Because wealth defense isn't just about hiding cash, we need to look at how this immense concentration of wealth influences the very laws we live under. Which brings us to a bombshell 2014 study out of Princeton University. This data completely upended conventional political science. The researchers looked at thousands of policy cases over 2 decades, and the contrast is just stark. For economic elites, there is a high correlation. If the ultra-rich want a policy, it is highly likely to become law. But for average citizens, the line is totally flat. A typical citizen's preference has essentially zero estimated impact on policy change. In short, average voter preferences matter most when they simply don't conflict with what the ultra-rich already want. And this brilliantly illustrates how the whole dynamic sustains itself. Imagine society's issues mapped out on two axes. Vertical politics involves conflicts over class, wealth trade-offs, and higher taxes on the rich. Horizontal politics involves culture wars, social issues, and internal divides between regular citizens. The sources point out that oligarchs benefit immensely when average citizens are heavily distracted by fighting each other horizontally. As long as the public is focused on cultural divides, they aren't looking up the vertical axis at the massive concentration of wealth at the very top.
Section 4. Oligarchy in American History. It's really easy to feel like all this is just a modern glitch in the system. But let's transition to the historical roots to see how this structural reality is actually deeply baked into the system itself.
If we chart this back to the Gilded Age in the late 1800s, wealth was wildly concentrated among the robber barons. The public backlash was huge, leading Congress to pass anti-monopoly laws and, in 1894, a federal income tax to redistribute wealth. But just a year later, an unelected Supreme Court struck the income tax down in a 5-4 decision. It took a massive, generational effort, nearly 20 years, and the incredibly difficult hurdle of a constitutional amendment in 1913 just to finally implement a wealth redistributing income tax. And the sources point out that this ability for a few men to overrule the masses, well, it wasn't an accident. Take a look at these sentiments from the founding era. James Madison and others actively warned about the, quote, excess of democracy. They were genuinely worried that working people, if given too much power, would demand a more equal distribution of wealth. The American Constitution, according to Jeffrey Winter's analysis, was deliberately designed with mechanisms to protect property from the so-called tyranny of the majority. This philosophy was literally built into the architecture of the government. We're all taught in school that these are checks and balances to spread power out, but Winters argues they actually consolidate power to temper the will of regular working people. I mean, for over a century, state legislatures, not the public, chose senators. The Electoral College bypasses the direct popular vote. The Supreme Court was designed to block democratic limits, and passing any law requires total alignment across all these bodies. It is a system custom-built to make radical economic change incredibly difficult. Section 5. Rebalancing the system. All right, here is the good news. Democracy and oligarchy aren't an either-or situation. They coexist on a slider. And history shows us that we absolutely have the power to push that slider back. Let's pivot to some concrete solutions presented by the experts. So here are the tangible, structural changes the sources say would immediately disrupt the wealth defense industry. First, fully enforce the Corporate Transparency Act, which essentially bans the anonymous shell companies that make hiding wealth possible in the first place. Second, properly fund the IRS so they actually have the firepower to investigate complex elite financial crimes rather than just endlessly auditing the middle class. And third, implement a wealth tax on the ultra-rich, which functions a lot like the property tax that average citizens already pay every single year on their homes. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Looking back, massive structural changes, like introducing the income tax or breaking up monopolies, they almost always seem impossible, right up until a major crisis or rupture forces society to evolve. The question isn't if another opportunity for deep structural change will arrive. The real question is, when that moment comes, will we understand these hidden systems well enough to demand a fair society? Will we be ready? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today on The Explainer. Keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.